So at the end of the last video, we talked briefly about the Archon Solon from 594 BC, who made concerted efforts to modify the government and society in Athens to deal with some inequities that had sprung up in culture. Now, Solon's effort were probably indirectly in response to a couple of major incidents that occurred back in the 7th century BC, which I will describe here. I'm flipping back the clock a little bit because I would like to put these two incidents in context with what goes on with Pisistratus here, who is our next major ruler after Solon, and that in turn, with what goes on with him, is going to have an effect on what goes on with Cleisthenes near the end of the 6th century BC. So first of all, the term for the type of ruler that I will describe in the next video, Pisistratus is tyrant. The Greek word for that is tyrannos. That is not actually originally a Greek word etymologically. It's somewhere Eastern, and it's a word that is very easy to misunderstand because obviously in English the word tyrant sounds like somebody who rules maniacally or with absolute power and oppresses his citizens. That's not what this refers to. A tyrant in the ancient Greek world is a ruler who has come into his position of power through some extra-legal means. He has replaced the previous government in power and has taken over and now rules as a single absolute figure. Even though he is a single ruler, and that in itself would have been a point of suspicion for both Greeks and Romans, that does not necessarily make him a negative ruler. And in fact, the tyrant Pisistratus in Athens was one of several examples in the ancient Greek world of rulers who held a position of tyranny and actually did so quite effectively to the benefit of their cities. Nonetheless, though, in later days, especially when you look at philosophical works like those of Plato, you can see that the tyranny was not a governmental position that was looked upon favorably by citizens or thinkers of the day. So at best, attitudes about the position of tyranny were ambivalent, and at worst, a tyranny could indeed de-evolve into an especially negative or oppressive form of rulership that made Greeks definitely look askance at it. There was indeed a lot of suspicion that was attached to the position of tyranny. However, let's go understand one reason why the position of tyranny potentially would have been looked at with suspicion in terms of these two previous rulers of Athens, so that in our next video, the tyranny of Pisistratus will make somewhat more sense. So prior to the archonship of Solon that we talked about in the last video, there was in fact an incident in Athens in the year 636 BC involving this Athenian citizen Cylon, C-Y-L-O-N. He organized a group of rebels to band together and attempt to take over the Athenian government. It was this type of coup that indeed was later often associated with tyranny in particular, that somebody would attempt to come together, take over the government, and eventually rule as a single person, or in some way that was inconsistent with the previous form of government. So Cylon attempted to do this, but he failed. He and his followers were besieged on the Acropolis, which had a large wall around it, so it was possible for somebody to be up there and not to be reachable, but still not to be able to escape. So after a standoff came up, the ruling family of the day, known as the Alcmaeonids, approached the followers of Cylon on the Acropolis and promised that if they turned themselves over, that they would be spared, they would not be executed. They did so, and they in fact were executed. So the Alcmaeonid family came to be known as practitioners of bad faith. And in fact, their name came to be implicated with a thing in Greek called an agos, which was basically a curse. In essence, an agos was a form of public denunciation a way of saying this family committed an especially grievous wrong that we are never going to forgive. And so members of this family descended later, including notably the politician Pericles, whom you'll hear a lot more about later, were often implicated with this Agos in their family if they belonged to the Alcmaeonids. It was hard to basically get rid of this brand on their name once it was stuck to them. All right, so Cylon ended up surrendering himself to custody and then actually getting executed. So that put an end to that takeover effect. Now, that obviously didn't solve the underlying problems that we alluded to in the previous video about debt, servitude, the inequity of wealth and such. So quite a bit of criminal behavior continued. 620 BC, we have an archon named Draco. Although his name looks snake-like, in fact, Draco is better associated with the word draconic in English, the one that refers to laws that are passed that are oppressively or excessively strict in the types of punishments that they mete out in relation to the crimes that the punishments are for. So Draco passed a law code that effectively said that just about every crime that could be conceived of would be met with a punishment of death. So that limped along for 26 years, and as you can now understand, that became unpopular, and one of Solon's pieces of legislation that we referred to in the last video was to establish this Areopagus Council. Here it is now. The Areopagus Council, A-R-E-O-P-A-G-U-S, is the Supreme Law Court, and there goes the darkness. Now we're back in the light again. Areopagus Council is the Supreme Law Court that is responsible for most jury trials, including those associated with capital crimes such as homicide or certain types of religious crimes. So the Areopagus Council is the response to this excessively severe law code. So now that you understand the background for these types of governments, the attempted coup with Cylon and this much too severe, austere government with Draco, you can see where Solon was going. But since Solon's legislation didn't really address the fundamental problems in society creating the inequity in the first place, it's often the case that somebody who steps forward to the populace and says, why don't we get rid of the current government? Trust me, I'll solve all your problems, and that way you'll be better off. That's what essentially paves the way for a tyrant like Pisistratus to take hold. So in our next video, we will start discussing the tyranny of Pisistratus. Come on right back.